So are you Team Marvel or Team DC? So raise your hand if you're Team Marvel. Okay. Raise your hand if you're Team DC. Yeah, raise your hand if you have no idea what I'm talking about. You win. Well, DC and Marvel are two general comic book genres, I guess, or producers. DC produced Superman comic book, but there's a movie out a few years ago called Man of Steel, one of the Superman movies, and there's a scene in this movie where a young Clark Kent, he's about 10 years old, and his super senses are starting to come alive while he's in a classroom, and he's unable to control them, and he starts to become overwhelmed by all the sights and the sounds that's causing chaos in his mind. So to escape his sensory overload, he literally bolts from the room and is found hiding in a janitor closet. Teachers and students gather outside the closet, urging him to come out, but he's not coming out. His mother was called, and she comes bursting into the hallway, and she comes to the door and calmly kneels down and softly speaks to her son. She says, "Clark, it's Mom. Can you open the door? How can I help you if you won't let me in?" With hands around his head as if he's trying to shield himself from all the chaos, he replies, "The world's too big, Mom." She takes a deep breath. It says some of the most amazing words. "Clark, then make the world small. Focus on my voice. Just my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me." After some time and lots of determination, Clark slowly emerges and is immediately embraced in the safe, loving arms of his mother. Do you ever feel overloaded with the chaos of life and long for a trusted voice to lead you out? Has God's voice become hard to hear amid the cacophony of the problems of life and of health, of relationships, of job, of high gas prices, of record heat, of war, of famine, of elections, and I could go on and on. Are you tempted to just throw up your hands, declare it all doomed, and go hide in a janitor closet somewhere exclaiming, "The world is just too big, Mom"? Let me tell you, it's okay. It's okay to feel that way. You aren't alone. In fact, you are in pretty good company. Elijah, probably one of the most powerful, God-fearing prophets in the entire Bible, felt exactly as you do. If you don't know much about Elijah, let me tell you a little bit about who he is. In our 1 Kings text today, we start out with Elijah being on the run for his life. Why? Because he showed up the evil King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Ahab and Jezebel established idolatry in Israel as the official religion of Israel. Can you believe that? The worship of Baal. And in one of the most dramatic moments, Elijah calls out Ahab and Jezebel. In one of the most dramatic "my God is better than your God" WWE showdowns in all of the Bible. When 850 priests of Baal and Asherah prayed all day long, but they could not get their god Baal to send fire down to burn the sacrifices, Elijah does something really dramatic. All alone, he goes to his altar and he douses it with water. And then he douses it again and again until it is literally soaked, and a trench of water is all around his altar. And then he prays to God, and suddenly down comes a tremendous fire from heaven. Not only burning up the sacrifice, but also consuming the wood and the soil and all the water and even the stones. The Israelites who were all around witnessing this event were so convinced that the Lord was the one true God and that Baal was a wannabe that they immediately fell to their knees and bowed down and declared the Lord as their God. And as a result of that, God ended the terrible 3-year drought with a provision of rain. Elijah was a tremendous success. Finally, it seemed like his long and hard work was done, restoring Israel and redeeming them back to the Lord. But Elijah receives a message in today's scripture from Queen Jezebel, vowing to kill him within 24 hours for exposing their lie. What more could Elijah have done? He had done everything possible to change the hearts of Israel and their king and queen. But the leaders of the nation seemed unfazed. And interestingly enough, the people didn't rise up against them in favor of God. There were no demonstrations. There were no protests. There was nothing. Not only that, now everybody's trying to kill Elijah. What was it all for? Convinced he had failed, feeling abandoned, utterly dejected and depressed, and now afraid for his life, Elijah flees to the janitor closet of the wilderness in Mount Horeb, questioning himself, questioning God. He goes from the highest point in his career to the lowest. He even asked the Lord to take his life. I can sum it all up this way. Elijah's call out bottomed out. And now he was running far out from the fallout, feeling down and out, stressed out, burned out, worn out, full of doubt, and crying out for a bailout to have a timeout in God's hangout. Y'all like that one, huh? I worked on that a long time. The world just got too big for Elijah. Have you ever felt like Elijah? You ever felt like the world got too big and you're all alone and you're crying out for a voice? God did something pretty amazing for Elijah, something we don't really expect from God, especially in the Old Testament. To a depressed, discouraged, scared Elijah, locked in a janitor's closet or a cleft in the rock or a cave, God gets down on one knee and says, "Focus on my voice. Just my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me." There was a wind so powerful that it literally split the mountain. But God was not in the wind. Focus on my voice. Just my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me. Then came an earthquake, and then a fire, but God was not in either of those. Focus on my voice, just my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me. Then came the sound of sheer silence. In Hebrew, the word is kol, Q-O-L, kol. The phrase there is kol damamadak. This phrase has been translated in a lot of different ways, but the most common, probably the most familiar, is a hushed whisper or a still, small voice. Focus on my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me. When Elijah's world just got too big, just too much, God didn't come to him in a dramatic manifestation like windstorms or earthquakes or fires, but God came personally. He came near. He came in a whisper, in a still small voice, in the silence. And Elijah heard it. Can you? Can you hear it? When you encounter the craziness of the world today, are you looking for God in the powerful and the dramatic or the bigness? Or are you resting in the sheer silence? Can you hear it? Listen. Listen. Focus on my voice. Just my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me. Silence is louder than you think, isn't it? Be in the silence. Be in the stillness. Allow God's presence to wash over you. But we have a hard time with silence, don't we? But what if silence is where God is the most vocal, the most talkative, the most connective, the most present? Then why do we spend so little time in silence? Why do we seek God only in the big displays, the big events, the huge revelations, in the miracles, in the loudest voices? We go through life deliberately filling our lives with more and more stuff and noise, filling our days with so much busyness, filling every waking moment with something to keep us occupied. And we wonder why we find it difficult to hear the voice of God. We fill our free time with hours of TV and internet and social media and entertainment. Cell phones and smartwatches have become an addiction, demanding our attention every time it buzzes, in the middle of a meeting or in the middle of a lunch with a dear friend. When do we ever take time to just stop, turn it all off, and listen? Sometimes even in the church or in prayer. When do we take time to listen? We love to do all the talking, well, other preachers. We love to do all the talking or all the singing or all the speaking, and we leave little room for listening. You see, God knew exactly what the depressed and discouraged Elijah needed. He needed a simple, personal encounter with God. When he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain, for the Lord is about to pass by," he simply told Elijah to sit in silence. Now, this wasn't any mountain. The Hebrew hearers of this story would have quickly recognized this place as significant because Horeb was also known by another name. Who knows the other name? I heard somebody say it's gold star for you. There's a cookie for you after the service. Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai. This mountain, Mount Sinai, is the same mountain where Moses communed with God, where Moses saw God's backside and Moses received the Ten Commandments. This mountain is also the same mountain, too, where Israel entered into covenant with God. You see, mountains were tremendous religious symbols in the Bible, since they are literally believed to be closer to God, who dwells where? In the heavens. And nothing is nearer to God than this mountain. Where is your mountain? Where do you go to when you're seeking the Lord's presence? When you're looking for God to walk with you through the chaos of life? But notice what God does here on the mountain. God called Elijah to the mountain not to fix his problems, not to commiserate with him, not even to console him. There's not one single word in this entire scripture that shows that. Instead, God called Elijah to the mountain to get Elijah refocused, not on himself, not on his problems, but on God and God alone. To trust again that God's got him, that God's going to cover his troubles. Focus on my voice. Just my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me. God has a way of refocusing our lives as well, if we'd listen. Several years ago, I was going through a very difficult time in my own life. I had become dejected about the ministry I was doing. I did not sense I was doing well, nor very successful. I actually considered leaving the ministry. The stress even affected my marriage, as I was becoming more distant and unhappy and lonely. The world was getting too big. I went to go see my doctor, a faithful member of my church at the time, and he put me on some antidepressants and connected me with a counselor. And then he asked me something that truly startled me. He said, "Before I write you this prescription, tell me about your prayer life." Have you ever had a doctor ask you that? I just stared at him. My mind went blank. I had nothing. I actually broke out in a sweat. I'm an ordained minister of 20 years. I was a minister in his church. In fact, I was his minister. He's probably paying his tithe to the church, which is going to cover my salary. And I had no answer for his question. I had no regular, deep, and intimate prayer life with the very God who loves me so much that he sent his son, Jesus, to die for me. I had unknowingly drifted apart from Jesus like two canoes left out on a pond. No wonder my life felt spinning out of control. No wonder I felt my ministry was not bearing any fruit. No wonder I felt like a failure. No wonder I felt lost. No wonder I couldn't discern God's still small voice in the midst of my chaos. Focus on my voice. Just my voice. Can you hear it? Then come to me. I'm convinced that God has not stopped talking to us. In fact, I believe he's still speaking to each one of us. Even Jesus promised that his followers would hear his voice when he said, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." But maybe we've stopped listening, or maybe we've forgotten how to listen, or maybe worse, we're choosing not to listen. You see, God will not compete with the noise of the universe that we selfishly put between us and God. God will not force his way into our lives, but God will stand at the door and knock. God will never give up calling those who are listening. Now, we may be begging for burning bushes or a great fish or a walk on the water or a big event or a big worship service or a loud preacher voice, other preachers. But displays of God's power doesn't necessarily lead to changed hearts. Instead, it's the still, small voice of God speaking to the human heart that moves us through the chaos of life. So when your world gets too big, too overwhelming, and you start to feel depressed or anxious or discouraged, or you're feeling like a failure, and you want to give up on yourself, or maybe you're feeling like you want to give up on God, maybe instead of filling up your life with more stuff, try going to the mountain, turning it all off, and listening. Focus on my voice. Just my voice. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Then come to me.